people up with Fathom have teamed up together to really explore and build capability and insight and engagement, if you like, around this whole world of employee experience. We do, and we will look at actually what do we even mean by employee experience in a minute. But just to set the scene, we do a number of things. We do a lot of work around EX capability building, so working with people teams in all of their guises, so whether that's HR, L&D, comms, business leaders, whatever it may be, to actually understand what employee experience is, and then to work with some employee experience design tools, which we're sharing a couple of those this afternoon. So we do a bunch of that. We do EX consultancy, so actually helping organisations on an in-house basis to develop and work with some of the tools that we use in the EX design process. And we also do design process facilitation, so that can be sprints, i.e. if you're working that sort of classic design sprint way over a number of days, or facilitating a design process over a much larger period of time. So today we're going to be, hopefully this is what you've signed up for. This is always the nerve-wracking bit when people say, no, I didn't want to do that, I wanted to do something else entirely. But we're going to be looking at how insights from positive psychology, what positive psychology can teach us to help us understand what our people need and what they want in order to be truly energized and happy at work. We'll be looking at why focusing on developing a brilliant EX will help your people engage and help your people engage during a massive period of change like the one that we're going through at the moment. Then we'll have a very quick look at what we mean by employee experience design. So we'll move from the big picture, what is employee experience, to actually what do we do about it, and that's what we mean by design. But we'll be going into the detail of that and sharing a couple of tools with you as well. So that's what we've got planned. Our starting point all of this, so sort of again framing our thinking on this, is this concept that Gallup introduced, and it's going to feel familiar to you, that employees have become the consumers of the workplace. So that kind of top down, we will do to you as we choose mentality is changing in a lot of instances, in a lot of organizations, and it's much more about understanding the experience that is being created for our people and then thinking about how we can make a better experience. I acknowledge the fact that this isn't universal and there are still an awful lot of organizations which aren't on this journey yet, but I do believe in the trickle down effect, that the more organizations we can get to think in this human and empathetic way, the better it will be for everyone, and actually all organizations will start to wake up to this and start to implement some of this thinking as well. So handing over to Emma. Emma, tell us about EX and why it matters.
Cool, it's a good place to start, isn't it, seeing as we are having an EX lunch and learn today. So let's start at the very beginning. Okay, just going to flick through some slides if I can. It's not working. Typical, isn't it? It was literally, we're having a few technical problems today, guys, so I'm just going to come out of this one sec. I'm frozen, my screen is completely frozen. Okay. Let me just see if we can stop sharing.
Katie, do you want me to share?
Yeah, if you want to share your screen instead. It's typical, isn't it?
We love Zoom until the moment it doesn't work.
It was all fine. Then as I've gone to just sort of start galloping through the slides, okay, seems to be all right now, but there we go. Oh, that's because it's you. That's why. Okay, so
just give me the sign when you want me to move.
Yeah. So what's the X and why does it matter? So we just want to spend a little bit of time talking about why there's this huge amount of focus on EX now. And I think it's fair to say it's been having a moment for the last few years, really. And if you look at the way kind of the Google search numbers have kind of risen exponentially, the world and its wife is focusing on EX, and quite rightly, because we know the world of work is changing, with even kind of glossing over all the stuff that's going on at the moment. The way the workplace is changing, again, has been happening on an exponential basis for some time. So we know that, people have different expectations at work. There's increasing diversity. Remote work is on the increase. I mean, now the last few weeks, we can really you can see the difference that's making. Suddenly those companies who who perhaps a few years ago was saying, well, we'd like to encourage more remote working and have more working from home. It's going to take a while to implement. And suddenly overnight, it's happened on a huge scale. There's more matrix working, there's more digitization. So many companies have got a digital strategy these days. The mobile technology, and again, here we are on Zoom, blurring work and life. So we're sitting at home having these sorts of sessions with our kids and dogs and pets, whatever it might be from behind. Gig jobs, again on the rise. And some of the reports say that the most desired perk is workplace flexibility. So the workplace is changing. If we just move on to the next slide, we can look at the kind of almost like the psychological contract and how what employees expect has really shifted in the last few years. And 20 years ago, it was enough to kind of show up to work, work your hours, expect good pay at the end of the day. If you had a boss that you got on with, great. There was not an expectation that your boss would be a fantastic leader necessarily. And again, 20 years ago, if you had an annual review, you're probably more likely to be in the minority. And nowadays, we have much higher expectations of what we want, what we need from work. Goes back to that Gallup quote about employees are now the consumers of the workplace, and it's not enough these days to have just a paycheck at the end of each month. We want a purpose. We want to come to work and have some kind of meaningful purpose for why we're here. We want to be developed. It's not enough just to be satisfied. We want to feel like we're getting developed, and not necessarily just in terms of career development, but in terms of developing mastery around the work that we do. It's not enough now to have a boss that tells us what to do. We want to be coached. We want to be, our boss to help us, find the answers from within. And we want ongoing conversations about how it feels to work here in our development. And, we're starting to see companies move from a deficit weakness-based approach to a strength-based approach. And we don't compartmentalize the way we used to, kind of job and everything else. There's a much more of a blurring, as I said, between, what happens at work and my life generally. So absolutely, the kind of the psychological contract is changing. And it's a great stat here from the latest Deloitte's Capital Trends report. 84% of HR and business leaders are saying that EX is important or very important, but only 9% say they're ready to address this issue. And people up in Fathom have been working in this space together for about a year, although separately for many years. And a big part of the reason that we kind of combined our forces and our different kind of areas of expertise was to really, help companies and individuals get good at this. Because I think it's there's very much a gap that's been recognised here that certainly the clients we talked to are sort of saying, I know I should be doing this, but I don't really know where to start. And how do I ensure that this is not kind of like old wine, new bottle? How do I ensure that I'm really doing this differently and really doing this justice? So slide here, which I thought was useful to share, just in terms of the kind of the business case for this. This is from some research done by MIT, and they found that companies with top quartile employee experience have a whole range of improved business outcomes compared to those at the bottom end of the scale. So they have more innovation, more customer satisfaction, higher profits. And Jacob Morgan, who some of you may have come across, he is one of the kind of the world experts in employee experience. He's written a great book on it. He found that those companies who are more experiential have lower turnover, have less 24% less headcount, and more profitability. So essentially, what we're seeing are very similar stats here to what we see from higher engagement, and I'll explain why that is in a minute. The two are absolutely intrinsically linked, but basically, this stuff makes sense. But as we know, it requires more than what HR can offer alone. When we're talking about experience, it's a much broader approach to the people agenda than traditional HR. And we talk about the kind of the different sorts of evolutions that HR has gone through. And this is kind of the latest, and it really opens this out, because this isn't just about the traditional HR function. It's about facilities. It's about IT. It's it's about your leadership. It's about so much more than the stuff that HR traditionally controls. So we kind of really need to broaden our frame of reference when we look at employee experience, I think. So in terms of defining it, I put a few example definitions on here, and Belinda and I are currently writing a book on employee experience at the moment, and looking at the definitions out there, no surprise that there isn't a single universal definition of EX. There are many different ways to approach this and look at this, and it kind of really depends on the lens that you want to use. What we've got here are some examples of different definitions, and you'll see they're actually quite different, I think. So I'm going to be a little bit flaky here, so I'm not going to answer this for you. What I'm going to say is it's important that you start by figuring out what it means for you and your organisation. It's a great place to start by saying, what do we mean by employee experience? How broad and wide do we want to take this? Some people like Jacob Morgan have quite a prescriptive way of defining it with some, very specific elements. Other people are taking a much more holistic kind of philosophical approach to it. And it's really up to you in terms of what would work for your organisation. But I think it's a great place to start by looking at what you really mean by employee experience, so that you're all on the same page when you're talking about this and you're tackling this. Okay, so before I hand over to B, I'm just going to share a little bit of the kind of the psychology and the neuroscience behind this. And this goes back to kind of what we wanted to do on today's Lunch and Learn. And my background is psychology anyway, and I more laterally positive psychology. And I think it can really help us understand how to get this right, and also why we see those great stats from MIT. This is the kind of neuroscience that explains what's at work. And it's quite simple, really. When we have great experiences at work, or indeed outside of work, what happens is we have a positive emotion. Of course we do. So, if someone says, thank you for a job well done, or if we get, recognised for a great piece of work, or if the company, supports us during a difficult time and we feel really grateful and really relieved, maybe, it tends to be associated with some kind of positive emotion. And what happens in the brain is when we experience a positive emotion, so when we talk about our brain being at positive rather than negative, neutral, stressed, when our brain is at positive, it releases a neurotransmitter called dopamine, which I'm sure you've all heard of. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter that's associated with that positive emotion. And what dopamine does essentially is it switches on all the learning centers in our brain. So this is a kind of the sort of chain of command, if you like, that results in engagement. So engagement is kind of an outcome, if you like. So we have a great experience. It feels good. We get this neurotransmitter flooding our brains. We have what we call a happiness advantage, or a motivational advantage. It results in engagement, and this is why we see all those positive business outcomes. But part of the reason that we are huge fans of using the principles of positive psychology to underpin the work we do, it really links to what Belinda's going to talk about in terms of using design thinking, and that is that that notion of empathy, of really understanding what works for people, and really avoiding making assumptions about what works for people, really putting ourselves in the shoes of the people we are designing for, in this case employees. And this kind of these principles sort of underpin the work we do, both from a psychological viewpoint and also from a kind of a design thinking viewpoint as well. So this is the neuroscience that explains how you can use positive psychology to explain why EX is so important, but also how you can use it to then design and deliver and make a difference with experience thereafter. So this is the kind of the psychology behind all of this. I could spend days and hours hours and days on this, but I only got a few minutes now, so I hope that's given you a little bit of insight into psychology. And this is a bit of a hybrid slide here that takes into account Hertzberg's hygiene motivation factors, and also the kind of the iceberg model of culture. And going back to that previous slide on psychology, very often when we design experiences, we quite often take the easy stuff, the obvious stuff, the stuff we can see above the waterline. So we might, kind of refer this sometimes as the kind of the Google approach to EX, which is, let's create a really cool, funky environment. Let's give people amazing perks. Let's give them gym membership. Let's give them, beer Fridays and free fruit Thursdays and all that kind of easy stuff. And that's the stuff that we can see, and it feels kind of, I think the part of the reason we go after that stuff is because it feels kind of easy and you can touch it and it's tangible. But this is only ever going to get you so far. It's only ever going to get you to hygiene and satisfaction. And what we need to do is we need to dig under the surface and find out what really motivates people. What are the things that really release the dopamine for people? What are the things that really give them that good feeling, that positive feeling? And we call these the motivation factors. So this is things like, mastery, autonomy, recognition, having challenging work, having responsibility, growth, development. And, we know from our research there are some kind of universal themes that sit under there, but equally we know that this will be different for everybody, which is where we have to really pay mind to empathy. So just wanted to kind of bring that to light, really, to say, when you're starting out in terms of designing experiences, don't make assumptions and don't just go for all the obvious, easy hygiene stuff that sits above the waterline, because that's only going to get you so far. It's only going to get you satisfaction. To kind of really create those experiences that release that positive emotion, you need to kind of go underneath the surface and figure out what it is that will really kind of make the difference for people. Okay, so just moving on then, handing over to B now to talk through the kind of the practicalities of EX design and how we use design thinking to really move the dial on creating a brilliant, compelling employee experience. So hand over to you, B.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And we have built in enough time for questions at the end. So do look at your questions and tell us what you'd like to know more about. So what is EX design? As Emma said, we are writing a book on this at the moment, so hopefully we'll be able to give you some sort of a coherent answer to this question. So when you talk about EX design, it's about applying design thinking to how we understand people and their experience. And importantly, how we develop, test and iterate solutions to meet their expectations as far as is possible. Now, I know that's a long statement and it's got lots of legs to it, but each part is really, really important. I will talk a little bit about what we mean by what is meant by design thinking. But hopefully what's super clear here is, now, I know a lot of you guys on the call, and none of you would fall into the camp of thinking that when we talk about employee experience design, we're talking about what the intranet looks like. But it is worth saying that when we talk about design, we're not talking about what something looks like. Neither actually are we talking about design as a development stage or phase in some sort of process. So you do the design and then you leave that behind and you move on to something else. And neither are we talking about designing HR, people and processes. It can be that, don't get me wrong, it absolutely can be that, but employee experience design, as Emma's already said, goes way beyond what HR owns. And so it's a really important, it's a mindset and a process and a suite of tools and activities as well, but it takes you way beyond what HR does. So it takes you into the whole organization. So it's big, but the good thing about employee experience design is that you can start small, and we'll look at some of the specifics about this. Sorry, I've got my people in the wrong place here again. So employee experience design, it's not what you think it is, but it is multifaceted, and it's a big toolbox with some really useful things that can do a number of things. What we explore in the book is that actually employee experience design is about employee experience strategy. The tools in design thinking can very much help you come up with a strategic approach to employee experience. It is also, as I said, it is about solutions for specific employee journeys and moments, but that takes you way beyond what HR can do. What's really exciting as well here is that we believe that employee experience happens within the context of the organisation and happens within the culture and the leadership culture of your organisation. We believe that the tools and the mindset associated with design thinking and employee experience design can absolutely be used to work on an organisational culture and leadership level as well. So as I said, it's big and it can do a lot of things. So one more definition for you, and then I promise we'll move on to some of the more practical stuff, but it's worth getting to grips with this. IDEO didn't invent design thinking, they popularized it, and their stuff is great. I want to be a bit over them because people have been loving them a bit too much since about the 1990s, but actually they are so great in so many ways, and they're so sharing with their stuff. And Tim Brown has written some great books, as has lots of them. So if you want to know more about design thinking, do check out IDEO's stuff. I know it's a cliche, but they're just really, really good at it. So design thinking is, again, lots of legs to this definition, all of which are important. It's a human-centered approach to innovation. So it starts with people and it creates new things. And what what's specific about design thinking is it does so within 3 constraints. So it does so within the constraints of what people want and what they're looking for, what technically is possible, and also what is possible and what does the business require. So it's like kind of like the commercial constraints, which is when we look back at our definition of employee experience design, it's about meeting employees' expectations as far as is possible, because it's not always possible to do everything because of business constraints and technical constraints and all sorts of other constraints. That is what we draw from. So at the heart of our approach to employee experience design is design thinking, this very human-centered approach to innovation. This book just still makes me well up, and there's something very deep for empathy and empathetic sharing that's related to this. I don't know if anybody knows this book. If you've read this book to your children, it's about a little boy who finds a penguin. And the little boy realizes that the penguin's sad, so he looks for a way to make the penguin happy, and he finds a way to take him back to the South Pole. But when he gets there, the little boy sees that the penguin is still sad. And the last line, towards the end of the book, it says that then the boy realized the penguin wasn't lost, he was just lonely. So it still gets me here. And the point of sharing that story is that design thinking goes back to a human-centered design, which at its core is all about empathy. It's about deep, not just asking people what they want, but actually looking at the why beneath the thing that they want, and looking at their needs, expectations, behaviors, attitudes, the whole remit of sort of humanness, really. And only by doing that can you actually create the right solutions to the right problems. So that's what's fundamental, and that's what we really like about design thinking. It stops you spending an awful lot of money on free beer every Friday, and then everybody's still leaving, and you're going, why did they leave? We gave them free beer. And actually allows you to have much more meaningful conversations to create the right experiences that people love and make people want to stay. And I think as we enter whatever the new world order looks like, and we've got this massive economic hit that's going to affect every sector, actually looking at the return on investment from taking an employee experience design approach to employee experience, I think will be really, really valuable, because it enables you to stop doing the things that really don't make a difference and focus on the things that actually make a difference to people's experience. For me, the little boy and the penguin really sums it up. It's like, if you really know what's going on for people, you can create the things that create a better experience, and you can cut out all the unnecessary, you don't need to go to the South Pole. So employee experience design, it all starts with being really intentional about the experience that you need to create. So Tim Brown from IDEO, he talks about the constraints of what people want. He talks about business constraints and technical constraints. When we moved to design thinking, yes, we're working with that, but we're also working in the realms of our organisation and our culture. So we believe the employee experience that you need to create probably sits at the intersection of 2 things, or 3 things, because you've got the people in the middle. So it's what is your brand? What is your culture? What is your purpose? What is your organization trying to do? That's going to be manifested in lots of different ways. So through your EVP, through your people vision, through your purpose and values and all that good stuff. So we don't say it's one thing here. It's like, what are you here to do? And what is the culture that you need to create in order to do that? On the other side of this Venn diagram, it's got the work. What is the work that needs to be done here? And what are the process and the tools and the technicalities that are necessary for that work? And Emma always tells a lot of the books, there aren't a great number, but some of the books have been written about this. They tend to take a very Silicon Valley, desk-based, knowledge-based workers approach to employee experience design. And I love Emma's story about, sorry, I'm going to probably get this completely wrong, and about working with people who are actually working in porter cabins, who had possibly the highest level of engagement of almost any organisation she's ever worked with, and a great employee experience. So yes, Jacob Morgan might tell us it's all about the environment and having a great office and it looks great. He tells us loads of other stuff as well. I'm not dissing Jacob Morgan, don't get me wrong, it's great stuff. But actually, it's all about the context. If your expectations, and this goes back to our chap in the middle or our woman in the middle, if your expectations are you're going to be working in a porter cabin, but you're going to have great relationships and people are going to make you laugh and people are going to give you responsibility and trust and whatever, then that's giving you the experience that you want. You don't need necessarily free fruit and a ping pong table to do it. So employee experience is about the work context, it's about the brand and the culture context of your organisation, and it's about the needs, expectations and attitudes of the people that you will be working in your organisation. So that's our starting point. If you get this right, of course, again, going back to, we had some stats at the beginning about why it pays to get a great employee experience. Well, it pays to get a great employee experience design approach to facilitate it is that high-performing HR teams are 5 times more likely to be using design thinking than other HR teams. I think for me that's pretty compelling. So going back to our definition, we talk about applying design thinking principles. There's a ton of stuff that you can read online that will go into a lot of detail. What really matters when we've seen the work that we do around employee experience design is 3 key design principles that underpin this whole thing. The first one is curiosity. So it's about being insatiably curious about what is possible and never accepting the status quo. It's a cycle of continuous improvement, if you like. The second design principle is all about empathy. Going back to the little boy and the penguin. It's about putting people and their experience at the heart of the process. So it's standing in the shoes of the people that you're designing experience for, rather than standing in the shoes of the organisation and what you want to do to your people. Third principle is about experimentation. So it's about always being in beta. It's about constantly learning and iterating by testing the multiple small solutions or prototypes. It's the difference between a big HR rollout that might take 6 months in the making, 6 months in the remaking, a year in the rolling out, and then it kind of doesn't deliver anyway because it's completely missing the point. It's about multiple small launches and tests and iterations and constantly being that cycle of continuous improvement and being in beta. So those are our 3 key design principles, and they will pop up wherever you see anything about design thinking, and they're absolutely fundamental to whether you're using this at a strategic level, whether you're using it to create new solutions, or whether you're using it as a sort of a mindset and a sort of philosophy to kind of underpin your approach to leadership and culture in the organisation. So how am I doing for time? I'll spend sort of 5 or 10 minutes maybe, and then maybe 5 minutes on some of the design tools, and then we'll go over to questions. So this is the double diamond again. Design thinking was around before it was sort of codified by IDEO in the 1990s. This is the Design Council's incredibly famous, incredibly useful depiction of the design process. So design thinking shows up in many different ways. One of the ways that it shows up is in an actual staged design process, which is great because design thinking is big, but there's a process and nature to get started in quite clear steps. That doesn't mean it's linear, but I won't go too much into detail that. What's important here is that you start with the empathizing phase, so actually human-centered design. You get deep and dirty with your people. Again, it's more than surveys, but we can talk more about that another time. That takes you wide. It takes you wide away from your starting point because you think you're going to be solving, for instance, high levels of employee turnover, but you might actually end up solving something completely different. So high levels of employee turnover is expressed through the lens of the organisation. You may well, through that empathy process, what you will want to do is to redefine that problem so it's expressed as what is the human need that you're trying to solve for. So it's not just business need, it's the human need that you're trying to solve for. Then you come up with lots and lots of ideas, some of which you'll test in as quickly and cheaply as possible, and you're going to a multiple iteration mode. So it's a classic innovation process. If you didn't recognize it as being the design thinking process, don't worry, because it shows up in lots of different places and different things, but it's really started to influence many different business processes at the moment, and it's also key to Agile as well. So it's got great stuff baked in. Some of the tools to look out for: a classic experience design process will start with some sort of journey map, and most organisations by now have done sort of some level of employee journey mapping, which is a great thing to do. We start one step before that, because actually we believe that when you're looking at employee experience, particularly when you're looking at employee experience for the first time or with a group for the first time, you want to be in a much more divergent thinking mode, a much more open frame of mind. A journey map is a very linear process that starts with people joining and ends with people leave. What we know is that people's relationships with organisations are no longer linear. So they might join you, they might jump out, they might come back in again, then jump out and then come back in again. And not everybody goes up a career ladder either. There's much more of a career cobweb now. So we've created the Employee Life Spiral as a really simple framework to facilitate discussion and conversation about what's happening across employees' relationship with you. As I say, that starts way before they join, because they will have heard about you through your employer brand, and exists after they leave because their memory of working with you stays in their brain. And so whether you're actively involved in an alumni program or not, their employee experience still stays, because experience stays as a memory. It can also be used as a tool when you're thinking about what you already know about the experience that you're creating. It can be used as a really useful tool to say, okay, we've got data here, here, and here, but actually we know nothing about this stage here. So it can be used in lots of different ways. We like it, as I say, because it's more open discovery conversation than a pure journey map. But journey maps are also really useful. So what we've got here from left to right are the typical stages of an employee journey as expressed by an organisation. As you can see, it tends to be what the organisation is doing to its people, as opposed to the experience that people are having. So we try and map the two together. Employee journeys can be used as a holistic level, so for somebody's entire experience of your organisation, of their relationship with your organisation, or they can be used to go into detail to a specific moment. So you can imagine doing, what does it look like as a maternity returner? What's the journey that our maternity returner goes through? It could be look at, what does it look like when we promote somebody into a management level for the first time? What are the steps? And then you can look at the individual moments within that journey and plot them above and below the line. So do we do that really well? Are we doing that really badly? And what is people's experience? Journey maps are a great way to get people together. As I've already said, most journeys are not owned exclusively by HR. Take onboarding. Onboarding tends to be owned by multiple people or nobody. So a journey map of an onboarding process is a great excuse to get people together. So it actually drives that collaborative approach to break down some silos, which is hugely important. So they're really, really useful. Again, journey maps can be used in multiple ways. So we try not to be prescriptive, use them in a way that's most useful for you and in a way that works for you. But do try and remember, don't do it as an academic process. Yes, if you want to start as an academic process with involving your people, it can be a good way to start. But very, very soon, if you want to do meaningful design work, you have to get your people into the room and do it with them as well. Otherwise, you're making assumptions. Just because you're an employee in HR or whatever you're in, doesn't mean that your experience of the organisation is the same as somebody who's not in HR. So don't do it vicariously, do it with your people. Personas. You can't press to find an experienced team without some sort of set of personas. In fact, one of the problems that we see with large organizations now is they have disparate and multiple sets of personas. Personas are fictional characters representing different groups within the workforce, and they enable you to ladder up from that. How on earth, even if you've only got 100 people, or if you've got 100,000 people, how do you design for those individual needs? Well, you actually create these fictional groupings of people, and then you can design with them. For them. They're a great way to create a shared understanding of what you're trying to create and for whom when you're working in a design team. So personas are a great thing to do, and we do a lot of personas for comms teams, for HR teams, for L&D teams, all sorts of different people. So that's a great thing to do. The last tool, it's not a tool, it's kind of a, well, it is a tool. It's not a thing, it's just something that you want to be aware of, and it's incredibly popular. Increasingly, I think sort of 3/4 of organizations said they are going to be doing this at some time, is to look at the moments that matter. The moments that matter are, says what the tin, they're emotionally charged moments that have a disproportionate impact on experience. So if you go back to strategy, where on earth do you start? If employee experience is so big, it starts before people join and it ends after they leave. What on earth do I do about this? This is a great way of saying, just because you're providing a bit of a shit experience at different points on your journey map doesn't necessarily mean that those are the ones that you need to sort out. It's the ones that you need to sort out that are emotionally charged and you're doing a bit of shit. Those would be a good place to start. And we can share some of this information afterwards, but some other elements to look for to really know that those are moments that you should be designing for are listed there, but I won't go into those now. So that was a really rapid fire tour of what we mean by employee experience design, the underpinning philosophy, which comes from design thinking, and some of the 3 or 4 tools that we use in our design thinking process. Love to, yeah, thoughts, questions. I can't see the chat. Maybe there is no chat. I think it's on your
There's
screen
no
share.
questions yet.
But we'd love questions.
Would love questions. Questions would be good.
Hey, it's David. I'm happy to kick off with an audio question, if that's all right.
Great, thank you, David.
Yeah, it was just, I mean, actually, it's literally the last thing you said, but not just because it was the last thing you said. It was the thing that I was thinking you might explain a bit more about. So you say that there are some moments in the life cycle or the journey or whatever that have a particular resonant impact and have a long tail, if you like. What would you say that the top 2 or 3 of those are?
It's a really good question. I was looking at some information from Gartner, a new piece of work by Gartner, and they were looking at this. And what was interesting is that, just not that interesting, the things that come up are different depending upon geography, which part of the world are you in, generation, and gender as well. The things that jumped out for me were just having been a moment when you've actively been discriminated against. Other moments that tend to stand out are maternity returners. What's it like at the moment that you return back to the workplace, or paternity, returning to the workplace after that? Other things that stood out, becoming a manager for the first time. Specifically getting a bit more granular about moments were having to instigate a discipline or a negative performance review to somebody. There were pieces about I've forgotten the other. There are another couple. Just thinking, Emma, when we do this with clients, the things that come up are first day being a really important one.
Yeah, I think it's just however the first impression manifests. It's the sort of the first impression moments, whether it's through recruitment attraction or your kind of actual first day. But I think it does. I mean, yes, although there is some research, I think it goes back to our own experience of working with clients on this stuff for years, which is you can't make assumptions. And we'll run a workshop with a public workshop with like 10 different organisations in the room, and they'll all have different important, highly charged moments that matter. From going through, so what the tools do that Belinda shared is they kind of walk people through, steps to really land on more an objective analysis of what they need to be working on, rather than I think it might be. So I think you just can't make assumptions. And I'd probably challenge some of the kind of the Gartner type research, because my own anecdotal research says that it's everything and anything really, depending on the organisation.
Well, yeah. There's a really interesting sort of rule of thumb that's used a lot in experience design, which is called the peak end rule. So you remember, so if you're looking back at an experience, the things that you really remember are the most emotionally charged moments in that. So it's either the very, very best thing, the very, very worst thing, and also the very, very last thing. And actually, if I think about my most recent experience of being employed, that very, very last thing, and so that in experience design, they quite often say, if you can't do anything else, get the very last thing right, or at least don't make it as painful. So exits, how people leave, massively important.
Yeah, and the psychology behind that's called, the psychologists call the primacy recency effect. It's the same thing. It's like you tend to remember the kind of the beginning bit and the end bit more than anything else. So,
what other questions, Paul? You're looking very thoughtful.
Sorry, no, I don't know. I have a question at the moment. I'm just sort of mulling it over, and I've got a frown line that makes me look thoughtful.
We do have a poll actually.
Yeah, we do. I forgot.
Able to put
Sure.
the joy of tech at the beginning.
Yeah.
Everybody see
poll.
the poll?
Oh. Interesting. Across the board.
Nice. We don't have another poll on this, but I'm always interested to know on design thinking as well. People's knowledge of, experience of, familiarity with design thinking. Katie, I'm not going to ask you to create a poll in an instant, because that would just be really, really unfair. Cool. So we, so I'm just going to share a couple more things with you before I like to finish a couple of minutes before the hour to let people grab a wee and go grab fresh air as well. Hang on, I'm trying to stop. How do I stop sharing that? Thank you. So a couple of things I wanted to share with you before we conclude. So we've got another Lunch and Learn, which is looking at virtual reality and employee experience. We're doing that with a really interesting VR and AR business in Brighton called Future Visual, that have done some very cool work around behaviour change and training. And we're also looking at some using VR and AR as sort of an immersive tool to help leaders understand organisational culture. So we've got a webinar, is that next week? The 21st, is that next? It is next week, isn't it? So we'll be doing that as another Lunch and Learn next week. We'll be looking at virtual reality and employee experience. So where will it make an impact and where is it already? And giving them the challenge, or is this just tech for the tech's sake? For tech's sake. We also have our, if you wanted to actually experience lots more of the content that we talked about today, but also get to step into a design thinking process, going through those double diamonds and actually working on one of your own projects, we've got a virtual EX design workshop that starts on April the 28th. We've broken it down for brain-friendly learning and to give lots of time to actually work on, use some of the models in the intro. We've broken it down into 2.5 sessions, so 2 sessions and then a mini session with work in between. So if you'd like to know more about that, get in touch with any of us, and equally, so that is an open course that you can join with us. If that's something that you'd like to do inside the organisation, so you work specifically on one bit of the employee experience within your organisation, then we can do that for you as well. But if there's no other questions, so thank you very much again from me for joining. I really like talking about this stuff. If you're one of the people that have ticked the box and you have done some stuff around employee experience design and you would like to give me some of your time to chat about that for the book, because I would really love to include as many organisations in the book as possible, not just the Googles and the Ciscos and the Airbnbs, because that's just really yawny. It's a really practical book, and we want to talk about how any organisation can start taking this approach and start working with some of these tools. So if you're on this call and you're one of those people, please do get in touch with me through the email, through Twitter, whatever, and let's have a chat about that, and we can include some of your stuff. So thank you from me. Emma?
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Great to have you along. We'll be sharing further details about the online course if it's of interest after this. And other than that, just keep in touch. And as Bea said, we really would love to hear about your stories and also what you'd like to hear more about as well. What would be helpful to you? What could we share that would genuinely benefit you on this kind of EX journey? So we'd like to do more of these. So if you can let us know what you want to know more about, then we can kind of tailor future sessions accordingly. So thank you for joining us. Lovely to meet you all.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully we'll meet you in your person.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.